Okay, I just want to say I'm so glad that Dr. Milton's here, and it's an honor for me to welcome her to the Jersey City Free Public Library. She is a very inspiring, multi-talented woman, and she will be discussing her inspiring book, Heeding the Caregiver Call, The Life of Barbara Ella Milton Sr. and Alzheimer's disease. She has a PhD, an LCSW, a clinical social worker, clinical supervisor, social work educator, child welfare advocate, activist, and resilience expert. She is multi-accomplished. She was an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Social Work at Rutgers, Montclair State University, Undergraduate Department of Child Advocacy, New Jersey City University, Graduate Department of Counseling Psychology, Touro College, Graduate Department of Social Work, and Hudson County Community College, Undergraduate Department of Human Services. She has been the past chair of the National Association of Social Workers, New Jersey chapter, Hudson County unit, and they had named her the 2014 Social Worker of the Year. She has also written a column for the Jersey Journal on resilient teens called Our Pride and Joy, and she has co-authored The Great Pause, Blessings and Wisdom from COVID-19. Dr. Milton Jr. was born in Camden, New Jersey, the only child of Barbara Ella Milton Sr., who died from Alzheimer's in January 2019. She is now retired and lives in North Jersey with her wife, Kay. And she will now begin her presentation on her inspiring and informative book, Heeding the Caregiver Call, the story of Barbara Ella Milton Sr. and Alzheimer's disease.
Very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you so much for being here today. All of you who are viewing, Stacy here today with us. Jersey City is my second home. I moved here many years ago to Hudson County, and I worked in the community for many years. And I worked very hard to be able to bring this presentation to a community that I love. And I'm so glad that this worked out for us today. And I think we're doing this a second time in November, if I'm not mistaken, which is National Alzheimer's Awareness Month. So thank you so much for allowing me to be in this space to speak to the patrons of our historic and treasured public library system in Jersey City. Let me say, of all of the things that you said, first off, that is testimony. My career, my professional development, the education I've been able to acquire in my lifetime are all testimonies to my mother. And the label and the moniker that I most embrace of everything, because in this space, I'm Barbara Milton, I'm Baba, I'm Boot. This is who I am in this space. But the label that most fills me with joy and pride is that I am my mother's only child. I am the beloved daughter of my beloved mother, Barbara Ella Milton Sr. And every time I get to do a talk like this, I keep my mom alive. And I promised her on her deathbed, that's what I would do. I would tell her story. I would keep her alive. I would help people to understand this horrific disease and what to anticipate and expect, and maybe even learn some ways to delay the onset of it, because Alzheimer's is ravishing our community. And for some inexplicable reason, women get Alzheimer's more than men do. They're diagnosed with it more. I'm going to tell you some of those statistics. And for some other inexplicable reason, 2/3 of the people providing care to people with Alzheimer's are women. This is a crisis, a public health crisis that is landing squarely on the backs, hearts, minds, spirits, and souls of women. And that's the message I'm going to help share today about what this disease is, the scope of it, what it means to provide care to someone who's in the grips of this fatal disease, 100% fatality in Alzheimer's, and how in the midst of that, miracles can happen, self-care can happen, and how you can cope with it, right? And those are some of the things I'm going to share. So I am going to share my screen right now. And thank you again, Sharon, for doing this test with me. So hopefully we're going to transition right to this screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Terrific. Yeah, so that's my mom, Barbara Ella Milton, Sr. And that was my mom when she was doing really, really well, very healthy, very vital. And I just love that picture of her. It just conjures up for me all of her good health, all of that joy coming out of her face, all of that vivaciousness on her face and her cheeks and her eyes, and how she liked to keep herself looking so well. And that was her in good times. The name of the book, Heeding the Caregiver Call. So the elements of this story and book is, you're going to hear about my mom's life, you're going to read about her life, you're going to hear about all the process up into her transition. In the book, you will see the way Alzheimer's disease unfolds. You're going to see the symptoms manifesting in the way I tell the story. You're going to get a good understanding of the kind of supports you need to put in place, so that I call it a symphony of support. I felt like a conductor, because you have to corral support so that you can manage the heavy lift of inheriting someone's entire life. Because that's what you do when you're providing care to someone with Alzheimer's. You're going to read about the way my mom and I had to make peace with the past. And you're going to hear about the redemptive power of love and forgiveness. There's a reason my mother and I had lots of conflict and struggle, and I'll share a little, and you'll read about it in more detail in the book. Throughout the book, as the book proceeds, there's 70 chapters in this book, you're going to hear about caregiving tips as we experience them. You're going to see the way we balance her care with my self-care. And, again, part of our story is that I had to step up and heed this call to care for my mother while I myself was in the grips of battling a pernicious form of bladder cancer. And so how did I balance the care between my mom and my cancer care? And then the last part of the book that I think is a critical element is, how do you get to this state of what I call radical acceptance, right? There's a lot of emotions, an emotional roller coaster. There's a spiritual sort of draining and waning and a constant wanting to replenish and restore your spiritual self, because this is a heavy lift, caring for someone. And all I can say is, for us and my story with my mother, we managed to move through the I call it resentments and the regret stage and the emotional roller coaster. And we got to this place of peace and gratitude and acceptance. It was a spiritual process. It was wholly unanticipated. And I have enormous, in retrospect, to me, this has been one of the biggest bonuses, if you will, for lack of a better word, of having gone through the experience. It has deepened my faith and deepened my spiritual core. And the reason why I wrote this book is because my mother was diagnosed in 2015, and we went searching for information about Alzheimer's. So where do you go? You go to the internet. We went to a lot of websites. We started checking out YouTube videos, etc. And we did not see a lot of stories about working class, everyday, ordinary women. And then my mother, you know, a woman of color, lesbian woman also, we just didn't see those stories. And my mother said to me, so maybe I don't have it because I'm not seeing Black women or gay people in these clips, in these websites, you know, not even on the Alzheimer's Association of America, on their website, did they have one person of color that was an obvious person of color in any of the images on their website. So my mother was like, do Black people get this? Is this real? And I said, of course, mother, you know, mommy, Alzheimer's doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're Black, white, gay, straight, rich, poor, you know, everyone gets it. But we were alarmed at the absence of our particular narrative and story. So in that moment, my mom said to me, well, we got to tell folks about this, Boo, my family name. We have to tell folks that anybody can get it, Black folks can get it, and gay people can get it. And she said, you like to write, you should write a book about it. And I said to her, okay, Mom, that's a great idea. We'll do this. And it was then that I started accumulating data, excerpts from appointments, keeping notes. I was writing notes all the time. I always had a camera on my mother. I was always recording my mother. In the era of Facebook and social media, I was doing all kinds of documenting of our story in real time through Facebook, through Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, yeah, one day, a long time from now, I will write this book. Well, that was the fall of 2015. And Alzheimer's took my mother much sooner than any of us had wanted, which was in January 2019, she passed. And I published this book in November of 2020. And so what I did was I honored a commitment to my mother to tell her story. Now, you're going to learn a lot about my mom as you read this book. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but I do want you to know she had a childhood that was framed by a lot of trauma. She was one of 11 kids. She was the eldest daughter. They were very poor. When you're the eldest daughter, in our particular family, there was sort of an ethos that like all her brothers were better attended to, because the idea was that they'd go get jobs, they would have families to raise. And so oftentimes, well, in my family, I'm not going to generalize this, in my family, that was the ethos. And so oftentimes my mother was left on the side. You know, many times she did not go to school because there weren't shoes on her feet or there wasn't enough clothing for her to wear. And she passed the clothes on to the younger children. And the boys got a lot more of the food and the clothing and that sort of thing. That was what it was like in my poor family, in my family. And this traumatized my mother. And she had a lot of emotional responses to that trauma. My mother also got pregnant at the age of 14. I am the product of a rape. Now, let that percolate for a second. What does that mean to have an unwanted pregnancy? It colored the relationship with my mother for the next 50 years of my life, right? Look, she's a survivor. She always had a job. She made the best of what she could do with a second grade education. When I said, oh my God, my mother is the epitome of resilience, this tells you, this, when you look at the work, when you look at her attributes, when you look at these qualities of hers that came to the fore for her to survive, and it's no wonder why I looked at this phenomenon called resilience, because my mother should have been a statistic. And in some categories, she is a statistic, okay? She does have mental health problems, right? She did struggle with obesity. She did struggle with self-esteem. She was a teenage mother, okay? But my God, that is not the whole story of my mother. And I wanted to study that one day and say, how did she survive? How did I survive? Right? Now, she had some other health issues as well. Hypertension, congestive heart failure, diabetes, Graves' disease. And what the research is showing right now is if you have this trifecta, hypertension, congestive heart failure, diabetes, you are more at risk for Alzheimer's. It is all related, cardiovascular health. So my mother was predisposed to Alzheimer's, and the research is now showing we can do something about that. And we'll talk about that a little later. And here's a picture of my mom in good days. There's a picture of my mother doing what she does best. She was a very funny person. She had a great sense of humor. I love this picture of her. She made that face often. And love this t-shirt my mom's wearing here. You can't scare me. I was born in Camden, New Jersey. This is when she was, this was just literally a month before she passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That was her Christmas present in 2018. Yeah. Now, me, only child. I was a premature blue baby. I was in an incubator for a lot of months. I was separated from my mother for 9 years. That tells you everything you need to know. As I told you, I was an unwanted child, and then we were separated for 9 years. In fact, the way that I got my name, most people say to me, you know, not often we see or hear of a junior attached to a woman. And that's true. Let me tell you that story. My mother, again, in the hospital, Cooper Hospital in Camden, New Jersey, had this traumatic birth of a child she did not want. The nurses came and said, oh, you got to name your child. And my mother tells the story that she wanted me to be named Sonia Denise. And that was what she was going to name me. But she was on drugs. She had just had the baby. Everything was sort of frantic and crazy. And when the nurse presented her with the form, she said, oh, hell, I can't, I don't remember. Just name her Barbara Ella Milton and put a JR at the end of it, so they'll know she's not me. And on my birth certificate, it says Barbara Ella Milton, Jr. And then they whisked me away, and I was in the care of multiple different family relatives and landed with my grandmother eventually for the first 9 years of my life. My mother, on the other hand, because my grandmother was receiving aid from the state, she was a welfare recipient, my grandmother at that time, and her ward of the state, her daughter, had a baby, she was penalized. And my mother was sent to the state home for girls. She was 14 until she was 18 years old. That was the law then, a child welfare law. And this framed for me why I wanted to study social welfare. Because I never understood it. I was very angry about it as an adult looking back. And I wanted to understand the history of some of these laws that would that was so inhumane to send a teenager away and penalize her for having a baby. That was the law at the time in 1959. So if you think about that, what we know today about attachment theory, bonding theory, how critical it is for mom and child to be bonded, and how that sets you off for emotional health and mental health and physical well-being, then you know, again, everything you need to know about the trajectory of the relationship between me and my mother So we had lots of challenges. And I too, in the midst of challenges, learned to bring my best self forward. I had attributes to, I inherited the work ethos of my family and the education ethos of my family. And I too had mental health and physical consequences of this sort of emotional trauma that came with being separated from my mother for a very long time and then disconnected for many, many years afterwards. So that's who I am. And there's a picture of me when I was a baby. And there's me when I was 5 years old. Here's me in high school. And here's me, you know, as a social worker in between chemo treatments at a conference. And I found the love of my life, Kay Osborne, in 1993. We've been together 30 years, almost. And there's a picture of me having chemo, right? And I'll just do on a side here, I have bladder cancer. And I want you to know this. This is my little public service announcement about bladder cancer. If you ever have blood in your urine, that's the #1 symptom for bladder cancer. It is not supposed to be there. And so if you ever have blood in your urine, then you get to the doctors and have them check out your bladder. That's what happened to me. I was in menopause for many, many years. And next thing you know, I had blood in my urine. This was July 23rd, 2012, when I was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And the #1 reason for it was smoking. And I hadn't smoked for over 25 years. And there it was. So FYI, if you want any information about bladder cancer, there's a wonderful organization called the Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network. I'm very involved with them. We do walks with them the first weekend in May every year. We raise a lot of money for research and education, and I do a lot of wonderful work trying to get bladder cancer to get the resources that it needs on the national stage. All right, so there's my little PSA on bladder cancer. I am still fighting bladder cancer. In fact, the reason why I'm here in Puerto Rico right now is because I'm in between treatments. And I'm going to tell you more about it as I tell the story. So at the time, heeding the caregiver call. Wow. Somebody wrote to me recently, the most important word in the title of my book is the word heeding. And that was an intentional word because I really had to reckon with, could I step up and do what was required when my mother called me for help on this fall night in 2015. As I said, at the time, we didn't have a warm and fuzzy relationship. We were very detached, right? We had a lot of struggle and a lot of stress. We connected on holidays. Because, you know, look, we're good people. We were just not well people, my mother and I. We had a lot of emotional baggage. But, you know, you show up for weddings, you show up for funerals, you show up on the holidays. In the book, I describe it as our encounters are like Ali and Frazier, right? Like we would be in a ring together and we would actually be verbally sparring, right? And then eventually within an hour of being in each other's presence, maybe 10 minutes sometimes, someone would do a knockout punch. And then we would retreat to our places. That meant like, oh, I'd get in my car and I'd go home. Or my mother would retreat to another part of the house and she'd be done talking because we were always hurting one another. We had a lot of emotional baggage, right? It wasn't all that we had. I mean, again, we had enough of the guideposts and guardrails. You know, my mother taught me how to order in restaurants. We would go to the Jersey Shore every summer for 2 weeks. She taught me about politics and history. We played all kinds of games. I got introduced to every kind of music imaginable, through my mother. She had no holds barred with music, whether it was Motown or whether it was opera. It didn't matter. Dancing, a sense of humor, fun, church, sports, right? So there were all kinds of normal mom and daughter kinds of family things as well. We had a lot of emotional baggage as well. And a lot of people said, oh, but you're gay, your mom's gay. That must have been so easy. I'm like, no, my mother rejected me and my gayness, just as she was rejected in her gayness. And let me tell you what the research tells you about rejecting people you love because of their sexual or gender identity. The research shows that puts you on track for many, many problems. The act of rejection. My mom was rejected and I was rejected. And again, I'm just saying all this for context about the way our relationship was prior to the call and why I had to reckon with, could I handle being in this day in, day out, 24/7, 365 relationship with my mother, because that's what's required when you need to show up for care. And all I want to say about that is, in the beginning, it was very hard. It got easier and better. And there was a direct relationship between my spiritual strength, my spiritual fitness, meaning my ability to move toward more compassion and love, and the caregiving process, right? So I'm going to tell you, and this book will tell you the ways that transformation happened. All right, so there's me and mom when I was in 8th grade. I was sad. See how big she was there. It was very, those were not good days. Yeah, those were not good days. But there I was in my 8th grade graduation. So this is an organization I want you to check out after this workshop. It's the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. Y'all know Maria Shriver, right? She used to be married to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Her mom and dad both had Alzheimer's. She is one of the leading figures working in Capitol Hill to make Alzheimer's and its impact, this disproportionate impact on women. She's lobbying for services for women because of the disproportionate impact of Alzheimer's on women. She's a fierce, fierce advocate. And if you go to that website, the Women's Alzheimer's Movement.org, you can get information about the prevalence of Alzheimer's. Look at this. Every 65 seconds, someone in the US develops Alzheimer's. Every 65 seconds, 2/3 diagnosed are women. No one knows why. 2/3 of Alzheimer's caregivers are women, right? And look at the sacrifice that usually happens. They lose money from jobs, they resign from jobs, they go into spirals of mental and physical health issues, right? If you're in your 60s, you're twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's over the course of your lifetime, more than breast cancer.
Wow.
After 60, 1 in 5 women have a chance of developing Alzheimer's. And this is what they're projecting by the year 2060. 13.8 million brains in the US will be living with Alzheimer's. And for every one of those people is a family. This is the breadth and the depth and the width of the impact of Alzheimer's. It is a burgeoning, critical public health crisis. And women are the victims of it and on the forefront of it. And because of people like Maria Shriver and her organization, we're going to be the ones that are going to help usher in the cures and the research and the funds to change this forecast. It's very exciting. They have endorsed my book 1,000%. If you go on their website, our story is there in the caregiving section. If you go there right now, there's a promotion going on for, there's a fundraiser happening where my mother's picture is right next to Sergeant Shriver's picture in a fundraising campaign. Who would have thought this woman from Camden, New Jersey, this working class Black woman, she's there, letting people know, yes, everybody gets Alzheimer's. And she's helping to raise money and awareness so that we can beat back the scourge of this disease. Makes me so proud. Our book is also on their bookshop. If you go to their bookshop there, you'll see my mother's face in that book. It makes me so proud that she's touching lives and raising awareness. The other organization I want you to check out after this presentation is the Act Now Foundation Dementia Center. This is a local organization in Hudson County. You might know this one, Sharon. This is Christine Allen and Carrie Lopez's organization. And this group, wow, we didn't have this group until 2018. When my mom was first diagnosed, oh, that's not true. I'm so sorry. They came around in 2015. I write a story about it. I'm so sorry. I should read that story to you. They just came on the scene about the time my mother was diagnosed. Now, this organization provides all kinds of support to people in and around Hudson County. And they have bilingual staff. They're located right now in North Bergen. And they have tons of great information. They have support groups. They organize brain health fairs right there in Lincoln Park a couple times a year. They have tremendous resources. They do dementia testing. And they are currently raising money so that they can create what's called a Dementia Village.
Wow.
And it is a community that they are want to build. It's visionary, that's based on this model. I believe it's in Denmark, where it's like a self-contained community with daylight and nighttime and controlled environments, and it creates neighborhoods and it integrates care and it keeps people in a community setting.
Wow.
As opposed to shifting them over to like our, got lots of problems with nursing homes and these sort of things. And look, let's be clear here. If you got money, you don't have a lot of worries in the world around any of the care that you need at the end of this stage of life. But, I wasn't one of those people. It costs a lot of money to deal with a catastrophic health issue and the need for long-term 24/7, 365 care. If you're rich, hey, no problem. But most of us are not rich. And so I'm going to talk about that too, because there's lots of things we have to advocate for in this country, so that we in our generation, who are in that sandwich generation, raising kids, caring for parents, or just those of us who are caring for parents, we need help. It's a lot of money. You need a lot of money, right? And no one in this country, the richest nation in the world, we should not have to lose our homes, lose our jobs, lose our savings that we saved for all our life. I myself, $50,000 of my money gone, never to come again. And it wasn't on anything extraordinary. It was just providing regular care to my mom. But $50,000 gone like that, there should be help for people. But anyway, we'll talk about that too. But anyway, the Act Now Foundation, great organization. Check this website out. And here's the thing about the Act Now Foundation, I also want to say. For every single book that someone buys, a percentage of that book goes to fund the Act Now Foundation Dementia Center. I made a commitment to Christine and Carrie in that organization because they were so helpful to me, that in perpetuity, for the life of this book, for any book that's sold, I am donating a percentage of the profits and my royalties to them for their work and for helping me get through that time in my life. So great organization, check it out. What I like on their website is that they give you these very good pages about the symptoms of Alzheimer's, right? So this talks about mild disease, some of the things you see at the beginning when they're just starting to get the Alzheimer's, right? They still drive, they work, they do social things, but you're starting to notice things like they can't come up with the right word or name for things. Like my mother would be like, she'd say, hey, what is that thing you're holding in your hand? I know what it is. I mean, it's a telephone, but she couldn't remember the telephone, the word. Or if I take her to see a doctor who's a new doctor, and she'd ask me over and over again, what did you say that doctor's name was? I can't, what did you say that doctor's name was? Okay, right. If you gave her a piece of paper, like a schedule, like I had lots of schedules we had to do, right, with aides coming in, this, that, and the other. Like she would look at it and then she wouldn't remember that you ever said it to her, right? Lots of losing and misplacing things. Oh my God, ATM cards, keys, wallets, all those sort of things. And, the trouble with planning and organizing, my mother was so organized. She had things color-coded with Post-its and magic markers. And again, she had a second grade education, but she figured out a way to be able to manage her banking and her lists for sending Christmas cards. And the computer was a big boon for her. She was always so good with her hands. So she really got into using different software packages for creating lists and envelopes and so she could send her cards out. She loved sending cards to people. And then at a certain point, as I was like looking at her things, this was what I call a forensic review of her paperwork. That's the chapter in the book dealing with her papers. Like at a certain point, the neatness was gone, the color coding was gone. At a certain point in the file cabinet, like, in the PSCMG file, you'll find information about like Comcast, or you'd find information about warranty papers for a blender. Like you just knew at a certain point, she just lost the ability to be organized. And it was so clear, you could see it happening when I went through her paperwork. Yeah, so the Act Now group, and then you go into the moderate Alzheimer's disease. This is when you're going to notice more of the emotional stuff that happens with the person with Alzheimer's, right? Not only was she confusing words, but now she was getting angry about it, more frustrated and more agitated, right? And she was more resistant and more like, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. I want some agency here. Don't tell me to take a bath. I'll bath when I want to. I don't need to bathe, and all the routine things, trying to make food using a microwave, really, really hard to do, right? Way more forgetful. It was at this point in her moderate stage, which is what she was diagnosed with, actually, was the moderate stage in the beginning. She was not a good historian about her own life. And so I had to be at every single doctor's appointment, because if I did not, my mom would just go in there and start telling stories about her bowling league, and they'd say, hey, how's your heart? Hey, I'm fine. Are you taking your medicine? Sure, I take every pill, not true. Not true at all. So I needed to be there because I had to be her historian, right? Lots of moodiness, lots of difficulty. At this point, you're thinking, can she really be living by herself anymore? Oh my goodness. I mean, can she answer the door and discern whether it's a stranger or someone who's supposed to be at the door? Can she handle her hygiene? Can she properly bathe? Can she properly toilet? Right? These are the things that start to happen at this stage. And the sleep disruption, big thing. They call it sundowning, right? Like during the day, she's like, restless and tired, and she likes to stay in bed and that sort of thing. And then at night, she's just invigorated. And that's what's scary, right? Because in the middle of the night, that increases your risk for eloping out of the house. Very dangerous, right? but you get all of this restlessness at night, that's sundowning, very scary time, very emotionally fraught in the evening time. And there are strategies for dealing with that. I lay all of that out in the book, things that you can do to help manage the sundowning and all these things. In other words, you sort of got to go with the flow of it. You know, like you can't be a rock. You can't say, here's my predetermined way of dealing. You have to be fluid, you know, like water. And you got to go one day at a time and respond to things as they're actually happening. And there's a lot of information between Act Now Foundation, the Women's Alzheimer's Group. There's a lot of other organizations out there, your Department of Health, your Department of Aging, the NIH. There's so much information that you can figure out. Just connecting to these resources, you can figure out how to manage it all one day at a time. You know, it's a grand experiment, right? It's a grand experiment that you're walking. It's a dance that you're doing one day at a time with your loved one. It will change. It'll be hard in the beginning. It gets better. I do encourage you to look at these websites. And, you know, when you get to the more severe stages of Alzheimer's, this is a stage where, you know, 24/7 care is needed, right? 24/7 care is needed. Full-time, around-the-clock assistance. And the way I dealt with that, being a person living with cancer myself, having medical procedures every 90 days since July 23rd, 2012, I go to Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. I have a surgery. They take tumors out of me. They biopsy them. We determine their danger to my body. I do chemo. I do whatever treatment they tell me. That has been my life, and it still is my life since July of 2012. And so, you know, it was not an option for me to bring my mother into my home in Northern New Jersey. It just wasn't an option. And we had to buck a family norm and had to make peace with the decision of identifying a long-term care facility, a nursing home, closer. You know, she was in Camden. I was providing this care long distance, 3-4 days a week. I'm schlepping down to Camden, right? Making use of other resources when I wasn't there. Many of those resources were technology, using cameras, using tiles, using nuts. These are wonderful little gadgets that allowed me, with apps on my telephone, to have two-way audio, video. So I managed my mother a couple of days a week, purely remotely. And there are a lot of stories in the book about how I did that. Some of them are very funny, but it allowed me to prompt her to take medicine, to take baths, to eat food, to just check in and talk with her. It allowed me to deal with who was at her door. I had cameras around the entire house, deliver food to her, all kinds of things. So we figured out a way to use technology to our advantage, and it's available to everybody. In fact, her doctor, Dr. White, when I told him about these two-way audio cameras that I was using, he was like, oh my God, can you like talk to some of these other families I'm dealing with in the center here, and give them some tips on all these sort of things? And it was, can I share all this information with them? I'm like, absolutely. Like, I'm just figuring this stuff out in the moment, And like I said, I'm like water. I'm not like a rock. I'm willing to try whatever I can. I have to be flexible. And whatever I learn, please, I'm happy to share it. And so that when we got to this level, it became very clear. It was time for mommy to leave her house of many, many years. She moved into our home in 1978, I believe. And we were faced with that decision of moving her out in the spring of 2018. And that's because she needed more levels of care with all her daily activities, getting dressed, bathing, toileting, taking her medications. Safety was the most important thing. She was starting to fall. She was not able to discern who was at the door anymore. She let a stranger in the house. and it was so scary. Now I was watching the whole thing in real time with these cameras. And fortunately, it was a very nice person who was there for a good reason, but like it could have been anybody. And of course, the elopement was a very big thing, like when she actually left the house and we did not know that she left the house. So, she wasn't able to communicate as clearly as she used to. Again, she was up at the middle of the night most times now, sleeping during the day. She forgot how to use the phone. There were so many times where I would call in and I'd be watching her also on a camera at the time she's on the phone, and she'd have the phone upside down and she just didn't know how to do it, hold it correctly. Or, the worst thing in the world is I'm on the phone with her and someone rings the doorbell. Well, good luck with that, Barbara. Mom oftentimes always forgot, I should say, that she had me on the telephone. So that was always a nightmare scenario because I had to figure out a way through the use of the two-way audio cameras of getting her to get back to the telephone to hang it up so that I could call back in on the phone. Right. So it's just, it's all of those kinds of things that happen because, again, what's happening in her brain is she has no capacity for any new memory. And what's happening is the opposite. All her memories are starting to be gobbled up like Pac-Man, with these amyloid plaques. And that's what's happening. And my mother actually, at the time she had her PET scan and was diagnosed, she actually had a stroke and she had the amyloid plaques. So she had Alzheimer's like sort of times two, right? Because this is the way you can get dementia. You can get it from strokes and infarction, which means that when they do a PET scan of your brain, they're going to see scar tissue, right? And my mother had that, and she had the amyloid plaques. So she was, there was no question she had Alzheimer's dementia. And my mom did get an infection as well. UTIs are very common amongst the elderly. And, the most recent thing you heard, right? Bill Clinton, right? In the hospital in Walter Reed, right? Or wherever, Chicago, he had a UTI. Very dangerous. UTIs in the elderly mimic all kinds of other kinds of disease processes. It's a very dangerous thing. So, and again, when you can't communicate, and then, it's a very dangerous combination to have an infection and not be able to really talk about what's going on for you. So it was for all these reasons, as mom moved through this disease and we had her in this nursing home, and we watched her continue to, as I call it, an unraveling mind. And we eventually get to the points where, she literally forgets how to walk. She forgets how to swallow. She forgets how to eat food. She forgets how to hold a spoon. Like that's what happens in the end. Alzheimer's is a wicked disease, just wicked in the end stages. And it was very hard watching it and experiencing it. So you gotta, again, how you show up, how you brace yourself for that is the work of your own emotional health and the work of your spiritual health, right? And your physical health as well, all right? There's mommy in one of her good days at the doctor's house, right? And I remember this day so clearly because it was at her cardiologist's office. And he's like, hey, how you doing, Miss Milton? You've been taking care of your medicine, you've been taking your pills. She's like, oh, yeah. And he's like, I want to look at your pacemaker defibrillator because she had one in her chest. And she said, I don't have no pacemaker defibrillator. What are you talking about? There's nothing in my chest, And then despite the evidence, you just roll that little collar down a little bit and there's this device there that's the size of a pack of cards. You can't miss it. But even that reality at this point here in this picture, you could not tell her otherwise. Yeah. That's why you have to go to these doctor's appointments with your loved ones. And a lot of times because you don't want to embarrass them, right? Dignity is everything. Don't want to embarrass your loved one. So sometimes I had to make an appointment before the appointment and have a phone call with the doctors and say, look, while my mom's in the room with you, I don't really want to be in the position of like challenging everything she says. I want you to just have a nice talk with her. But I'm gonna tell you the real deal right now. Here's all the medicines she's taking, here's the struggles she's having, here's this and that, right? And while we're in the room, I want to have respect. I want her to have dignity. I don't want to be like, no, mom, you know that's not true. Come on, mommy, that's not true. You know you don't take your pills, mommy. Come on. That's not the position you want to be in. That just leads you in a bad place, to a bad place. Dignity is everything. That smile says everything from my mother. She's still a whole person, right? Yeah, her brain is being gobbled up at the moment, but she's still there. She still wants that relationship with her doctor. And our job is to allow her to have those relationships. And so sometimes you got to do the footwork before and after those appointments as well, right? Like, you know, mommy, why don't you go out into the waiting room? I want to get this paper signed by the doctor. And then I'll say to the doctor, well, you know, that wasn't true what she said about, you know, she really isn't taking the Miralax. And she did miss a number of medications this past week. Is that a problem? Right? Or I'm noticing she's falling a little bit more. Her balance is off a little, right? But I tried not to do it in a conflictual way with my mother because dignity is everything, right? So here are the issues, right? We had lots of warning signs. We had to deal with getting powers of attorney. The sooner you get those, the better, right? Financial and health, powers of attorney. You got to get those documents, and every state is different. So New Jersey has a specific form for powers of attorney. You have to get them notarized, and you need to do it ASAP because here's the thing. If she's already diagnosed with Alzheimer's and you go get a POA, that could be an invalid POA. So these are things you have to talk about right away when you start seeing the warning signs. For my mother, in 2014, she called me up one day and she said, Boot, I just want you to know I just went to the bank. I took out some money and I put it in a Cheerios box, and the box is on top of the refrigerator. I want you to remind me that it's there so I don't throw it away. I'll see you. Have a good day. That was the call I got in 2014. Now, I made a note of that call in my phone. I told Kay about it. I mean, it is odd. I called my mom back right as she hung up on me. And I said, do you know you just called me and said such and such about a Cheerios box? And she said, yeah. I can't talk right now. But just remind me that it's there so I don't throw it away. And, you know, and I'm just like, that was weird. Right? That was a warning sign. Or the few times my mother would tell me, oh, darn it, I had to get another ATM card. I misplaced my ATM card. Well, there was about 7 of those misplacements. 7. I learned about that when I took over the power of attorney of her finances. And I'm talking to the bank guy at TD Bank in Haddonfield, and he says, you know, this has happened a number of times. It's like the 8th time your mom has like misplaced her card. I'm like, whoa, right? So again, the sooner you get the power of attorneys, the better. You are taking on her whole life, right? Her whole life, everything, social, medical, financial, right? Everything related to her home, her car, everything related to her, the political, her voting and her civic engagement and her relationships with her churches and her groups and, right? All the medical appointments, you're taking it all on. When you heed the call, it is not a light lift. It is a heavy, heavy lift. Yeah. And in the beginning, for your parent, the person you're caring for, lots of denial. It's a very emotional ride. And you expect that, right? Because their mind is unraveling, right? None of us wants to be sick. I know about denial. I didn't want to have bladder cancer, right? You know, I don't want to have my illnesses either. None of us want to be ill, right? So that is part and part of the journey. She's going to say, I don't have Alzheimer's. I heard that a million times. She would say something like this. Hey, what's the name of that thing you said I have? It's called Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's. That has something to do with remembering stuff, right? And I'll say, yeah, mommy, it's Alzheimer's. It's a disease about forgetting, you know? And she'll say, oh, yeah, I don't have that. And then, you know, and she'd be like, what's the name of that disease? It has something to do with forgetting. Oh, I don't have that, right? Like she'd say that over and over and over again to me, you know? But that's just her in the disease process, right? Safety is the number one thing you have to deal with. I was in a long distance relationship. You have to, you know, figure out a way that you can keep eyes on your loved one. Keep eyes on your loved one. And if your loved one has a weapon, listen, lots of our loved ones have weapons, guns in particular. My mom had a gun. I didn't know she had a gun. But if you think they have a gun or something, get the gun out of the house. I tell you a story about that in the book, right? Yeah, cooking, big issue. Lots of fires happen. Inability to, you know, forgetting to turn off burners and this sort of thing, or having popcorn for 9 minutes in the microwave that lead to a big fire, right? Cooking was a big issue we had to face. It's all around safety issues, right? The safety is the most important thing. Safety from falls, safety from eloping, safety from weapons, safety from cooking, safety from strangers, safeties from, you know, the ability to get in and out of the house. I had to change all the locks in the house because mom couldn't get a key into the locks anymore. So on the inside, I had to change the twisties, you know, the twist locks, so she can navigate it with a twist as opposed to a key. Again, this is how $50,000 just disappears, you know? It's like all these sort of things, right? Handrails, removing carpet runners, right? Making sure she can use 911. As far as I was concerned, if she couldn't call 911, she was out of that house, right? So these are the things, safety first, safety first. Everything was from a lens of safety. Medical issues, medication, the car, whoa. That is a big issue. You'll see lots of videos about people in their cars, right? You see lots of videos about this role reversal where the child becomes the parent. You know, my mom, this is, I was going to share this one story with you here. Let's see what page that was on. Let's see, what was that? Page 93. Here, listen to this. This will give you a little picture of it, right? It's a big deal losing the right to drive when in your mind and heart you are the safest, best driver in the world. Mom would always say, I ain't never had no accidents. I only need to go around the corner and up the street, and I can do that with my eyes closed, she said. Well, my face looked like the kid from Home Alone. No! I would silently scream, you can't drive with your eyes closed. She even convinced me to write a letter to the DMV requesting that they make an exception in her case to drive. I provide that letter here in the book. It was in my wheelhouse to be an advocate. I was curious to see that if in such a case it could be made. My mom dictated the essence of the letter to me. Mom said, I only need to be able to go to my girlfriend's house to play cards, to get a ride to bowling. and up the street to food and Walmart. They have to let me do that. We agreed that if that didn't work out,
And
that would
she's
be the
doing it
end
till
of it.
2:30.
The result was a nice letter thanking us and denying
good.
us a modified suspended license. The DMV said they simply didn't have the manpower to be able to enforce the safety of persons like my mom, who requested to maintain their licenses without restrictions on driving. The car is a big deal. The car is a big deal. It means everything. It's symbolic of, independence, right? We had to manage getting family help, in-home help, community help. We had to deal with nursing home decisions. We had to deal with a lot of losses, physical, cognitive, financial, emotional, social. Alzheimer's is called the long goodbye. It's the steady and progressive decline of your loved one. We had to deal with Medicaid, prepaid funerals, the selling of her home. We had a pet in the house, so we had to navigate the care of the pet and the safety of the pet as well. We had to deal with hospice decisions, her passing, eulogies, graves, visits in my dream, and ongoing grief. These are the issues you'll expect to deal with, right? So as I said, some of the caregiving tips are you get that POA as soon as possible, get a handle on assets, get an elder lawyer if you need to, set up some folders, start saving receipts, and when, as soon as possible, this is for regular folk, you can apply for Medicaid long-term support services. And you do that sooner rather than later. There's a 5-year look-back period on your assets, 60 months. They're going to want your records, right? And why is this program invaluable? Because Medicaid long-term support services is what pays for nursing home care, right? They also have a part of Medicaid that provides community help that keeps you in your home. It's much less in terms of like what they can offer you, right? It's like some number of hours of aids, lifeline alerts, some modest things in your home to help make your home safe. But when you know that your loved one needs that around-the-clock care in a nursing facility, you want to apply for the Medicaid LTSS, right? You can get lots of info, as I said, from like these organizations. You want to always focus on dignity, don't overcorrect, include your loved one in decisions, whether they're big ones or small ones. And here's something I learned. Don't start sentences with the word, remember this, remember that, because they don't remember. It's like putting salt in a wound. It just makes them feel bad. So I had to learn that very quickly, right? Safety first. Meds, falls, cooking, locks, fire, cars, right? And at a certain point, you have to realize you got to let go of all that was. Yes, we didn't have a good childhood. Yes, we weren't close growing up. Yes, she hurt me and wounded me, and I hurt her back. The only way you can show up for someone who's not well is to show up with love and compassion. And I thank God I was able to come to that place, right? Because once you let go of all of that other stuff and you show up in love, well, then it becomes very simple what you're doing. You are just there to make sure she's okay. Is she eating? Is she well fed? Is she drinking proper fluids? Is she bathed? Is she taking her meds? Is she getting to the doctors? Is she sleeping well? You're attending to her health and her wellness, and you're doing it with love. Are you keeping her routines normal? Are you allowing her to continue to do the things she loves? Is she still connected to the other parts of the family? Is she still connected to her friends? Is she enjoying her sports and her movies and the things she liked to do for fun? My mom had a virtual playground in her home. She had over 400 DVDs. She has over 1,000 CDs. She loved music. And how often did we just sit there and hold hands and listen to Ella and Sarah Vaughan and Loretta and Gladys Knight and all the other musicians. We'd dance in the living room. We'd get coloring books out. We would play cards. That's how you want to spend your time. We'd have good meals together. We would laugh. Her favorite show was Gomer Pyle. She just loved Gomer Pyle. And when Gomer Pyle would go, well, golly, my mother would just start laughing, the most robust laugh. It would bring joy to my heart. And that's where you want them to be, right? That's where you want them to be. You have to get help. You cannot go it alone. You cannot go it alone. And you cannot sacrifice yourself to your parent or to the person you're providing care to. You have to nurture your other relationships too, with your children, with your spouse, with your friends. I don't know where I would have been without the love and support of Kay and my network of friends, right? I still took vacations in the midst of this care. Yes, it meant I had to figure out ways to make sure mom's care was covered. And she did have sisters in the area and nieces and cousins in the area that I made use of. And I had to pay extra money to get more time with paid aides and companions. But that was okay. That was a calculation I made because I still needed to take care of me, right? I kept a log. I encourage you to do that. Keep a book, keep a file, write your questions down. Be prepared when you talk to these doctors. Make sure you're checking out the pets as well. There were lots of times in the beginning when I'd go into the kitchen and I'd see the cat's water and milk dish. And I was like, I didn't pay it any attention because I was more focused on my mother. Was she eating? Was she okay? And then one day I bent over to touch the milk and it was like curdled cottage cheese. And I was like, oh my God, right? I didn't even think about that, right? Because I was so focused on my mother. But if they have pets, you have to discern whether or not they're really able to have a pet in the house and that pet is being cared for, right? Think about technology and how you can use it to help you. You have to discuss long-term planning. The funeral discussions are so important, right? It meant everything that my mother created her funeral. She told me to the T what she wanted to wear, where she wanted it to be, where she wanted to be buried. She chose her casket, what food she wanted. She told me she wanted me to cook. And I was like, Mom, there's no way on that day, after doing your eulogy, I'm going to be able to sit down and make this meal you want me to make. No, you make the best chicken and the best ham and the best collard greens and the best biscuit. You have to make. I'm like, Mom, I can't. I will have just buried you that day. And she goes, okay, I understand that. She's like, well, then can you find a Chinese restaurant? And that's what we did. We went to a Chinese restaurant after the funeral and had the repast there in her name. Listen, celebrate their life each day. Celebrate their life each day, right? Because they're still there. They're still there. They're still there. Celebrate the birthdays, the days they get up, the normal days. I tell the story about the day when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. And this happened to be in a week where my mother was having difficulty putting clothing on. Like I remember I was on the camera that one morning and I looked in and her head was in the part of the shirt where your arm goes in. And she was sitting on the floor because she had gotten all in a kerfuffle over it. And I had to spend about 40 minutes to get her up off the floor, to get that head out of the wrong place, to get the shirt off of her head, and then start over for her to put her clothing on correctly. And again, this was all on a camera, two-way audio video camera. I'm sitting in, I think I might have been in treatment, actually. I might have been having chemo, and I'm on this app on my phone telling my mother how to get dressed, But a few days later, when the Eagles had won the Super Bowl, and we had made a plan to see the parade together in Philadelphia in her home, we bought my hoagies down, bought the potato chips, got her pineapple soda. This is what we did. And I walk into the house, my mother's got Eagle gear on from head to toe. She had the Eagles hat, the Eagles shirt, the Eagles pants, the Eagles socks, the green and silver sneakers to a T. In the same week, she couldn't put her head in the right shirt a few days earlier, right? I celebrated that day. That was a good day. And above all else, you got to keep the faith. Keep the faith. Keep the faith, right? It's just gonna, like as long as you show up in compassion, and as long as you show up, and you're taking care of yourself, and your focus is their dignity, and your focus is their safety, and you let go of all that past stuff, just keep the faith. You're walking the walk. You're in a sacred path. You're in a sacred path with your loved one at that point. And that's where we were on our journey. These are the two aides that were taking care of my mother. You see that smile on her face? We were very silly, but they provided amazing care to my mom. Here she is in that Eagles gear, right? To a T, right? One of mom's favorite things was eating those dum-dum lollipops. They called her, that she was the dum-dum lady. And when I come to the nursing home, she's like, bring some of them lollipops. I want to give them to all my friends here. She was very generous, So they called her the dum-dum lady. My mother, Amazing Grace. You know that song? Everyone knows it. I like the Mahalia Jackson version myself. My mother liked the Elvis Presley version. And in fact, at her funeral, she said to me, if you got to play the Elvis Presley one, So, but that's the version she loved. She had a bit of cowgirl in her. And there's my mom and Kay just dancing a little bit. We took her out on lots of day trips when she moved up to North Jersey. And, I always kept flowers in her. She loved flowers. She was a gardener. And I made sure she always had fresh flowers in her and the long-term facility that she was staying in, right? Listen, self-care, very important. Caregivers get sick more than non-caregivers. Caregivers take longer to recover from illness more than non-caregivers. And caregivers progress further into diseases than non-caregivers. Let that percolate for a second, all right? So you are more at risk for getting sick because you're a caregiver. This happened to me. The fall of 2015, I get the call. I'm battling bladder cancer. The cancer's in my bladder. By the spring of 2016, the cancer moved into my right kidney, and I lost my right kidney. That was the stress of caregiving, right? I talked about financial stress and other kinds of stress, the heavy lift, and this one way it manifested in me. That is for real. That is for real. You have to take care of yourself. You've got to learn to breathe. Meditation helps a lot. You've got to eat properly. You got to drink water and stay hydrated. You should be doing some kind of exercise. You have to stay connected to positivity. You have to stay positive. You have to learn to prioritize, pick your battles, learn to let stuff go. You have to do your own medical wellness as much as theirs. I mean, there are times you go, I'm not going to do mine. We throw ourselves on the altar. We cannot do that. Women are good at doing that. But remember, like that whole, if you go on an airplane trip and they talk about the oxygen mask coming down and they say, if you have a baby with you, you don't put the oxygen mask on the baby first. You put the oxygen mask on you first. Then you can care for the baby. And that is very true. You got to take care of yourself, your medical appointments. I joined support groups with Act Now Foundation. I joined some Facebook support groups. I joined other kinds of Yahoo groups, other groups. There's so much support out there. You got to talk about everything that it comes up. I was angry. I was raging. I was so upset. I was depressed. You got to talk it out. You can go to therapy. There's lots of things you can do. For me, I also chose to write about it. Writing helps me tremendously to get it out of my head. For me, if I can clear my head out, I'm okay. So and not everybody has to write a book, but you can write a journal. You can write a little note. You can write a letter. I wrote letters to God. Like, why is this happening to my mother? How can I handle this, God, with cancer? Please, God, help me, like writing was a good tool for me. Asking for help and then accepting help. Very important to do. Very important to do. And this is the other trick too. And I know you're already caring for your loved one, but believe it or not, if you take the focus off of your needs for a second and you help another person, that's a good way to take care of yourself as well, right? So, one day at a time, maintain your emotional fitness, strengthen your spiritual armor, take time outs, rest, take breaks, give yourself permission to cry, learn to laugh, enjoy the company of people in your life. And when you get a chance, do what you love. For me, I golf, I go to the theater, whatever. When you can, build that in. You need to have the counter to the heaviness of all of that. Stop fighting the obvious. They're not going to get better. It's just a long goodbye, and accept that and stand there in love and compassion. And that's when the serenity comes. That's when the peace hits you. That's when the peace hit me. And I think if it happened for me that way, it can happen for others as well. Right? So there's us with mommy. Here's me on a golf course. And this is the view out my window right now. That's my place in Puerto Rico. You eat well, you exercise. All right. Listen up. January 17, 2019. I came back from Puerto Rico. I said, Mommy, I'm ready to start writing this book now. Excuse me. She'd been in the nursing home now for 6 months. It was a nursing home she chose. Very important to include your loved one in these big decisions. I took her to see 5 different nursing homes. And this is the one she chose while she was able to make the decision. So when the time came for her to go to a long-term care facility, we knew where she was going. And so anyway, 6 months in, we're at that place of radical acceptance. We've got all these relationships with all these lovely new people in this nursing home. We've got a schedule of visits. We're part of the team. We're all hooked in. And I'm like, now we can start writing this book. So I came to Puerto Rico, jotted down some stuff. And I said, hey, Mommy, I'm thinking we're going to call the book Heeding the Caregiver Call. And we're going to write this together. Here she is holding the book, January 17, 2019, right? Holding it. I was like, oh, what do you think? She's like, great. Well, what happened next was January 18th, my mom closed her eyes and she never opened them again. January 17th, when I returned from Puerto Rico, I gave her that book and said, we're going to get to work starting tomorrow. The next day, she closed her eyes, never opened them again. January 20th, we had to engage the services of hospice. And on January 31st, she died. It happened just like that. So now we pivoted to her funeral. And I decided to write the book, as I told her as she was dying, that I would do this in her name. And there's my mom's headstone. She loved to bowl. She was a professional bowler. She loved flowers. And when the book first came out, someone said, listen, I know you, Doc. I expected this book to provide a lot of good information on Alzheimer's. I knew it would be a practical guide on caregiving, all the details. I know that's how you are. But what I didn't expect from your book was a love story.
Love story. Yep.
And that's what this book ended up being, a love story. That we so transformed our relationship that in the end, holding hands, making peace with the past, and standing in love, that's what we got. And I try to spell that out in the book. There's an artist named Albert Gorgi. This is what it feels like. That's called melancholy. It's a huge hole where my mom used to be. And I have to deal with that grief every day. Like talking about it brings up the grief, and it's okay. You know, it's okay. I cry. I know how to soothe myself positively. I get a lot of support. I let go of a lot of the, did I do the right things? Was it right to send her there? This process connected me to God in such a powerful way. I go visit her every week at her grave. I have a podcast now that I'm doing where I'm actually reading each chapter of the book in a podcast. It's called Listen Up with Dr. Milton. And I go there and I read the book to my mom. And then I convert those into podcast episodes. It's so important to stay connected to my family and to have these rituals with my mom and to make sure I'm resting. That's why I'm here, to rest, try to take care of myself, stay in gratitude. But every time I tell my mom's story, a part of me reconnects to that grief. And I have to double down my efforts to cope with that, because it's called iterative grief. It means you experience over and over and over again. So here are the takeaways. You can hate Alzheimer's, and I do. But you have to love the person. Remember, there's a difference. They're doing the best they can. And also know this, that if your loved one's a gay person or a straight person before Alzheimer's, they're going to be that with Alzheimer's. So, I had to tell people in that nursing home, look, my mother's a lesbian, and so if you're going to have like something in the social hall, she's not going to want to be like paired with some guys dancing, and if that's out your comfort zone, whatever, that's fine. But I just want you to know who she is, And so my mother was very taken with asking some of the nurses there to marry her. Like, you just had to know that's who she is. She proposed to a couple of the nurses a couple of times, and they dealt with it in such a lovely way. You know what I mean? If there was any kind of trauma or mental illness before Alzheimer's, it will be there with Alzheimer's. For the first time in my mother's life, she went on medication for her anxiety while she was in the nursing home. I had tried to get her on that medication for about 50 years. But there you go. And it helped her so much. She was so less anxious once she started taking some medication. You have to be an advocate, and you have to be the historian, right? Just remember, in the beginning, it can be abusive. It's jarring. It's frightening, right? It's like there's behaviors that you just don't expect, right? And that's how it is. But the safety is the most important thing. That's what you always put first, right? And everything else will go from there. Think about this. Who's in your life? Who you need to plan for in your old age? Think about downsizing. Man, I had to go through that house. Oh my Lord. My wife and I, we've gone through our stuff already. We're letting stuff go. We do not want to do this with our kids. We do not want to burden them with a 4,000 square foot home with floor to ceiling stuff in it, Like, think about that. Think about that when you plan for your older age and what burden you may leave for your children, Think about catastrophic care. Think about insurance programs for your future. Think about putting money away to plan for events like this, right? This is all very important, part of planning for your older age. Do you have a funeral wish? Do you have your funeral wishes written down in paper? These are the kinds of things you have to think about too. Remember, all feelings are okay. It's okay to feel the feelings, and you're going to go through the whole gamut of them, and that's okay. Take care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. Get the help you need, find the experts you need, increase your support, and do not have any regrets. Do the things you promised you would do while your loved one has the capacity to participate and enjoy them. And maybe one day you'll even think about telling your story. It can bless someone else on their journey, right? So the book is 358 pages, got 100,000 words, 6 parts, 74 chapters. I wrote it so you could read it from front to back, or just pick the chapter you want to read about, right? It's just about me, my mom, Kay, and her cat, Pepper. Lots of resources in there. And, it's being told in my voice. And my voice has 2 different kinds of bends. One is I'm her daughter in real time doing this. And the other is I'm a social worker. So all throughout the book, you're going to hear me talking about be an advocate, stand up and fight for this and for that, write those letters, to Congress, ask them for more money for research, ask for Joe Biden's catastrophic health bills and the Build Back Better plan. Fight for these kinds of policies that will help us who are caring for our loved ones get more help for nursing homes. Like, there's so many ways we can be advocates. Join organizations like WHAM, like the Alzheimer's Association, like the Act Now Foundation. There's so many ways we can help, raise awareness and get research and the focus on Alzheimer's, right? And the last thing I'm going to say is, my mom passed away before COVID. Look, it's a whole other ballgame what people have had to experience during COVID and this pandemic, and people in nursing homes. Nursing homes were ground zero, right? And my heart goes out to everyone. We lost so many during the pandemic. But we did not have that experience. Whatever I went through pales in comparison to what people of this most recent period have had to go through. And it was devastating, right? Like having to Zoom and not being able to see your loved ones. And I just needed to say that because, they had a very different experience than what I had. What you won't find in the book is you'll never hear me vilify my mom. You won't hear any vilification of any worker or any system that we engaged in. I will critique them, but hey, people are doing, this is amazing work people do at every level. There's no conspiracy theories. I don't uphold any myths about nursing homes. It's not what you're going to read in this book, right? I know how hard all of these people work to provide care. Are there some rogue people who don't are not that professional or this or that? I encountered a few of them. By and large, these are people doing, in my view, God's work, right? Like my mom said to me one day, Boo, let me tell you something. I said, what's that, Mom? She goes, these people are so nice. They even wipe your behind for you. And I was like, ain't that something, Mommy? She's like, yeah. She said, can you get them some Philly pretzels? Why don't you get them some pretzels? Because they're so nice here, And that's who we ran into. But I had to form those relationships. I had to show up. I had to expect them to be professional. I had to show them how to care for my mother, because it's a relationship. It's a relationship, that we built that relationship. All right. So if you're interested in the book, you can get it from www.heedingthecaregivercall.com. And remember, a portion of each sale helps to fund the Act Now Foundation. And you can catch me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Like I said, I have this podcast called Listen Up with Dr. Milton. And that's the end of my presentation.